this video, we're going to talk about what one Old Testament scholar describes as one of the most extraordinary texts in the entire Bible. Now here's the thing. I guarantee that you will not be able to guess what this extraordinary text is. That should be enough to keep you around for a few seconds, attached to your phone, huh? Right? Stick around, we'll talk about it. We're here to study the Bible, we're here to study the Bible, we're here to study the Bible. Might get us in trouble, cause we're being intentionally provocative with our intros. Nope, I know that you just sat through the theme song, which you still love. I know it and you know it. And I'm not going to tell you what the extraordinary text is. Not yet. I'm gonna make you wait. I'm gonna tease this out as long as possible, okay? So instead, let's start like this. When you're reading the Bible, it's important to look to the left and to the right of the passage that you are studying to help set the larger literary context, okay? That's fancy, but you can't just take a text in isolation. You have to see what it's attached to in order to make sense of it. Now, to our left of the passage we'll be looking at, we have a story of Saul chasing David. Remember, Saul is jealous of David, is threatened by David. Saul wants to kill David. So we have a story of Saul chasing him, but we also have, in the same story, David not killing Saul, even though he had a perfect opportunity to do so. This is the bit where Saul is chasing after David with 3,000 other warriors, and he has to make a pit stop in a cave where David is actually hiding in the back. The text says that Saul goes in to cover his feet, which is a euphemism for relieving himself, which is a euphemism for other colorful things. And remember, in this story, David is encouraged by the people around him. He sneaks up and slices off a little bit of Saul's robe. And then when Saul is done doing what he is doing, David comes out after him and says, "See this? I could have got you, but I didn't." Okay? To the right of our text, we have a story of Saul chasing David. Remember, because Saul is jealous of David and threatened by David, and Saul wants to kill David. But we have a story here where David does not kill Saul, even though he had a great opportunity to do so. This is the one where Saul brings 3,000 of his fellow warriors to track down David in the wilderness, and David finds Saul and Abner sleeping in their makeshift camp, and everyone around David's like, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." He's like, "No, I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm just gonna take the spear that's by his head as a symbol that I could have, but I'm not going to do that." In both stories, David says things like this: "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed." And to Saul he says, "Why do you listen to the words of those who say, 'David seeks to do you harm'? This very day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave while you were going to the bathroom. And some even urged me to kill you, but I spared you. See, I've got this piece of your outer garment. I will not raise my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." David continues to pour on. He says, "May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you, Saul." And to prompts for David to kill Saul, he says, "Do not destroy him, for who can raise a hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" David continues, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike that person down, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." But now take the spear that is at his head in the water jar and let us go. Okay, when we read these stories, I assume that we take them at face value. David has these golden opportunities to kill Saul. He does not do that. David's a good guy. He means what he says. He doesn't want to do things this way. But we should also note that the author is pouring this on really, really, really thick, right? He's trying to make sure that readers come away from these stories thinking exactly the things that I just mentioned. David's a good guy. He means what he says. He doesn't want to kill Saul, so on and so forth. He wants you to know that David doesn't kill Saul, even though he has the opportunity to do so. That's the message. Now, wedged in between to these two stories on the right and the left, which are very, very similar, we'll talk about that at a different time. Wedged in between those stories, we have one of the most extraordinary passages in all of the Bible, which, time for the big reveal, drum roll. It's the story of Nabal and Abigail. Right? You didn't see that coming. Maybe a bit of a letdown because you're thinking, who's Nabal and who's Abigail? Okay, so let's recap this story. It is good and it's beautiful in its literary artistry. I think that's really the point here. This story it's got so many layers that we're not going to be able to unpack. All right, so here's the deal. There's a super, super, super rich guy. Like I'm talking the top 1% in this region of the world. And he's located in the tribal territory of Judah. That's important. Remember, when we talk about the united monarchy, what David eventually comes to establish, the connection of Israel in the north and Judah in the south, like Saul's kingdom is predominantly in the north, in Israel. But this guy, he's the super rich guy, the 1%, he's in the south, and his name is Nabal, as I've already mentioned. Now, for ancient readers everywhere, when they hear this name, and it's sort of, it's buried a bit, it's just like, there's a certain man from Maon, and it tells the story in that way, and then it tells us his name a few lines later. When they were to hear the name Nabal, they'd throw their flags on the field, like penalties all over the place. Like, what? Nabal, really? Okay, so we're supposed to believe that some parent somewhere would name their kid Nabal? Who names their kid Fool? It doesn't make any sense. And I know, we all have heard some pretty ridiculous names, but this one is bad. And for a lot of folks, they'd say, all right, I'm gonna throw my flag on the field. I'm just gonna back away here a little bit. But for the sake of it, let's just refer to this man, Nabal, as Fool for the rest of the video. So Fool is married to a woman named Abigail. And even the author highlights right off the bat how different these two characters are. Fool was hard and evil in deeds, and Abigail had a good mind and lovely looks. They're two really polar opposites. It's a wonder they ever got married. Now, David hears that this super rich guy in Judah is shearing his sheep, which in the ancient world, this is like party time. It's like a feast. It's people getting drunk. It's spring breakers in Cabo. It's that sort of a scenario, okay? You've got the wine flowing and the meats flowing, and it's just a time of raucous debauchery. All right, David sends 10 of his men to Fool with a message, and it says this: hey, my little army out here in the wilderness, we've been watching over your shepherds, and we've made sure that nothing happens to them. We've made sure that nobody steals any of their stuff, and in return, we'd like some food and some provisions and some supplies. So give whatever you can to David. Names David. David, when he's given this instruction to his people, even says, go to him in my name. Now, this text here, it reads pretty polite. It's even more polite in Hebrew. But as one scholar, Stephen Mackenzie, notes, the request, even though it's polite in the Hebrew, it's basically extortion. It's like protection money paid to the mafia, and in this case, David and his crew of people are the mafia who are demanding payment. But Fool is not having it. He says this: who is David And who is the son of Jesse? Though, Nabal certainly knows who David is, okay? He's putting on airs here, but who is David and who is the son of Jesse? These days, many are the slaves breaking away from their masters. So Fool is referring to David as a slave breaking away from Saul because Fool knows who David is in the relationship, the frayed relationship between Saul and David. He knows all of this stuff. And shall I take my bread, Fool says, and my water and my meat that I slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men who come from I know not where? Ho, ho, ho! Whoa! 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 One more. Whoa! Okay, because in the ancient world, your entire identity is sort of associated with the land that you own or the land in which you live. And Fool is saying of David, first of all, I don't know you. Second of all, I really do know you. You're a slave and Saul is your master and you're running from him. And third, why am I going to give you anything? You don't even have any land, you chump. Look at me. I've got 3,000 sheep or whatever. Like I'm the super 1%. I'm filthy rich. Who are you? You've got nothing. David is peeved, and rightly so. He loses it, in fact. Strap up, boys, he says. We're gonna go kill some people now. If this was a good like Quentin Tarantino film, some things would be happening. Leo would be strapping on his blowtorch at this point, okay, like going after some folks. Now, a couple things we should note here. Fool, as I've said, is a big deal. Most people would think that he is the equivalent to the king of the south, the king of Judah. He's not so named, but he's very powerful, more powerful than probably anybody else, and he's overseeing this piece of land. It says that he's a Calebite, so he's probably over the entire group of Calebites. He has a massive amount of money. He's got a huge operation. He's not afraid of David or David's piddly little army. Okay? Fool's status is huge for this story. I need you to tuck that away because it's going to come back to us. Another thing, this is a side of David that is very different than the stories that are flanking on either side. Remember, I'm not going to kill Saul. May it never be. The Lord would strike me down. I'm not going to kill Saul. May it never be. I'm not going to raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. In the middle, I'm going to murder this person who's not giving me bread. Okay, so Fool's people go and tell Abigail what has just happened. Remember, Fool is foolish. Abigail is smart, cunning, wise, pretty. She's got all of the good things going, and this guy does not. It's a wonder why they ever were married. Okay, I hope you see what I'm getting at here. Now, Abigail's smart. She rides out to David and to his crew, and she begs him not to kill everyone. Her speech is eloquent. It's beautiful. It's passionate. It's even prophetic in the sense of she's painting the scene for David's upcoming kingship. She's fully on board. And she promises to get her husband on board too. Oh, and just to help the deal here, she brings David and his men a ton of stuff. 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of grain, 100 raisin cakes, 200 fig cakes. She's paying off the hitmen, okay? And it works. The speech, the gifts, all of this stuff. David is sort of putty in her hands, and whatever anger he has, he lets it subside. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting because David wanted to kill Fool. Abigail intercedes, and then 10 days later, Fool dies. Also, right after that, David does not miss a beat, and he immediately marries Abigail, and they ride off into the sunset, the glorious, beautiful sunset. Now let's take both of these facts in turn. First, Fool dies. Be a skeptic for a second. The timing of this is suspect. Right? David wanted to murder this guy. He doesn't. And then 10 days later, he just dies. Some people think that when Abigail tells him what she told to David, it says that like he basically goes catatonic. He may have a stroke, a heart attack, whatever. And some people wonder, like, does she know his health issues and she telling him this or whatever? It's also like this divinely orchestrated sort of death. Like David says, I'm not going to raise my hand against this person, kind of like he did in the flanking passages. And God's going to judge, and here God does judge. Fool. The timing is just really crazy. A Jewish scholar named Baruch Halpern likens this story to an Agatha Christie murder mystery, or a more recent example, think about the movie Knives Out. Really fun movie, side note. David and Abigail and all of David's men and Fool's men, they're sitting in a parlor, and Daniel Craig comes in and tries to get to the bottom of it, just to, again, to really use that Knives Out analogy. So the detective is asking them to describe the last few days, because they're all trying to figure out how Fool died, because it's just really scandalous, the timing. As Christians, I think that we rush to this conclusion, like, oh yeah, well, I mean, Fool was foolish, and he had a chance to help David. All he had to do was give him some bread, but, you know, he didn't. I guess he was being extorted, but, you know, I don't know, he didn't help, so God killed him a few days later after, you know, David wanted to. That all makes sense. But remember, again, to the left and to the right, the image of David is one who is unwilling to take vengeance on his sworn enemy. And this is just all a bit heavy-handed. We've got these two stories. I'm not going to raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. And then David's super ticked, but is talked down from it, and then Fool dies anyway. I just want to go on record here too. Fool is not the only one in David's story that dies a really timely, for David, death. Later it's Saul and Saul's sons. It's Ishbaal, it's Abner, it's Saul's descendants who would rival David for the throne. It's Amnon, it's Absalom, it's Amasa, it's Uriah. There are a lot of people dying in this story, people who pose some threat to David. And except for Uriah, who's Bathsheba's husband, the author of Samuel is at great pains to make sure that David is so far away from any of these scenes that he cannot be implicated. But if you're a skeptic, where there's smoke, there's got to be fire, right? Also, the marriage. Fool, again, was a big deal, which means his wife was a big deal, which means David marrying Abigail was a big deal. We might have these romantic notions about these characters in the Bible as just falling in love with people. Like David sees her and she's beautiful and she gives a speech and he's like, oh man, I love her. Or she loves him, and we just kind of think that like they're made for each other. But this is a political marriage, pretty clearly, because of Fool's status. By marrying Abigail, David asserts his right to that kingdom in the south. Remember, you've got Saul up here in the north and Fool in the south, functioning as sort of a kingly figure. Once he's out of the picture, then David can swoop in, marry his wife, and sort of take on all of this stuff. He's asserting his right to the Judean throne, and he's actually subverting Fool's family's right to the throne by doing so. This is not how things were supposed to happen in the ancient world. Ostensibly, there would have been someone from Fool's family who then would take Abigail to give her children. But that's not happening. So we have this story that on the surface, it seems like David is in the wilderness and he asks a rich guy for some bread. And when he says no, then David gets all indignant and wants to kill him. But there's so much more at stake here. Status, wealth, land, marriage, kingship. If this is a murder mystery, if this is Knives Out or Agatha Christie, who stands to benefit the most from Fool's death? David? You could make that case. Abigail? It's a wonder the two ever got married, because he's foolish and she's smart and pretty. She's got things to gain from this as well. Now, for the author to claim a supernatural cause for Fool's death, it's maybe, in light of all of this, it's maybe a bit of a stretch.
Bye.